let's start with Anurag first. You can see this notepad, right? I'm typing the question.
Yes, yes. Suresh.
Yeah, please go on.
So, so I started my professional career as a business analyst
Mm-hmm.
and have been working for the past 5 years. I'm proficient in requirement gathering, requirement validation, creating the human diagrams such as use cases.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from that, I've uh, worked in various SDLC methodologies, right from waterfall to agile.
Mm-hmm.
And due to this, I gained enough knowledge of different projects that are out there in the market.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from that, my main responsibility as a business analyst is to communicate with my internal team regarding the requirements and act as a point of contact for my development team regarding any question of on business or requirement.
Okay. Can you describe me your current project? I mean, what was the project all about? What are the processes that you have handled in that particular project?
Sure. So my current project is with QVC. It is a multinational tele shopping and e-commerce company. And the project is we are developing a order tracking system for their website so that customer can so that customer can track their package in the real time. So as a business analyst, I started this project in the initial phase and work with my project manager closely in the need of the project. For that, we have done the SWOT analysis, and after the detailed analysis, I started interacting with various stakeholder and business users in order to elicit and gather the requirement using various elaboration sessions like brainstorming, uh, interviewing technique, uh, focus, focus group session. And after getting those requirements, I documented it using BRDs and RDs.
Okay. So, what are the typical contents in a BRD?
So basically, I use the complete company's template that are available over there, which includes executive summary,
Mm-hmm.
scope of the project,
Right,
problem that is related to the project,
right,
and the
right.
business benefit, project cost, assumptions related to it, and uh, some issues that are related to the project. After that, we have uh, business benefits, cost, assumption,
Right.
and also the risk management plan is included in the BRD, which includes risk assessment, risk response, and benefit realization.
Perfect.
And at the end, we have conclusion and recommendation.
Perfect. Now, when you perform the SWOT analysis for your project, what are the typical threats you observe for your project?
So basically, the threat that we have observed in SWOT analysis is that there are other companies, other e-commerce companies, which are currently have the tracking system in their website. So let's say the Amazon have full-fledged tracking system in their website. They can even tell where is the driver right now. So that was the main threat to our product.
Okay.
But the same thing, the QVC works in a different way as the model is like the model is e-commerce, but the working functionality is different.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Fair enough. Now there goes the second question.
Okay. So basically, in requirement elicitation phase, the requirements are always unconfirmed. We are not sure about the requirements or the stakeholder, like what are the requirements, uh, say. So we do the requirement elicitation session so that to get those requirements clear and in a conformed phase. And in requirement gathering phase, we have the requirements in conformed phase and yeah, conformed and in documented phase. So I think that's the major difference between.
Yes, perfect.
So the product basically product backlog is the place where all the user stories or all the requirements or we can say all the features are there regarding to the product. And release backlog is a subset of product backlog. So we do the planning and planning on it in we do the planning in sprint planning meeting. So to decide which user stories or which features is gonna release in next sprint, and the sprint backlog in the sprint backlog may be the tasks that are remain in the like the tasks that are unfinished in the running in the completed sprint, and that is known as sprint backlog.
Few correction over here. Product backlog is the main backlog wherein you would be having all your requirements, your issues, your defects, or your change request, everything. Now the subset of product backlog is your release backlog. Now release backlog itself would span multiple sprint backlogs because one release would comprise of 2-3 sprint cycles or 2-3 sprint backlogs. So whenever there are unfinished tasks in a sprint backlog, that would go again back to the product backlog, from where it would again be picked up in the next sprint cycle.
So data flow diagram represent the flow of data between the components of a system, and sequence diagram also represent the same but in a sequential manner. I think that's the main difference between them.
Yes,
And
absolutely. So what happens essentially is in data flow diagram, you could read it from any part. So let's say we have a data flow diagram, you can read it from any part. But for a sequence diagram, we have a sequential method to follow in order to understand the flow of the sequence in that particular diagram. So that's the major difference.
uh, so a stakeholder communication plan basically is a plan to how to interact with the various stakeholders with using and how which technique should a business analyst use to get the requirements from the stakeholders.
Mm, I didn't get it. Can you please come again? What was-
So basically, it is a plan uh, to know how to
Okay, so it is essentially a template which we create for various stakeholders in our project who are geographically distributed. So we need to understand how to communicate with them. So in order to understand and develop a plan, we create a stakeholders communication plan, wherein we highlight all the list of stakeholders, where they are located, and what is their preferred mode of communication via email or via phone call or via Jira if you are using any requirements management tool for that matter.
okay. Uh, so so let's say we got a requirement and we documented it. But if some business user or stakeholder uh, demanded any change in the requirements, then we make another version of that requirement.
Okay, and how do you achieve it in a particular system? Let's say we are using Jira.
So I didn't get the question.
I mean, how do you version this requirement in a particular system in real practice? What you would do to version a requirement?
I'll update the requirement that is previously and
You would never update it.
no, no, sure.
So how you would version it is like you would create a new requirement and you would link the old requirement with the new requirement. Okay. So you would establish a traceability. So if
Right.
someone would like to trace the requirement from source, how the requirement originated, he can go through the different versions of the requirement, which the requirement has gone through so far.
So a component of use case diagram are actor, boundary,
Mhm.
the relationship,
Mhm.
and there is one
Okay. And what
the
about
system
the other one? If we would like to write a use case in a textual format,
in action.
the use case name, the use case description, the basic flow, the alternate
Yeah,
flow,
the
the
precondition.
exception, precondition, and postcondition.
So user requirements can be like defined by what a user expects in in his or her product, or what features they want to include in the product.
Mhm.
That is known as user requirements.
Okay,
Once those requirements are gathered, then it can be documented using various documents like the idea.
okay. Then how is it different from business requirement?
So basically, not sure.
Okay, so what happens essentially is, let's say you are working in a particular domain, insurance domain. So there would be a set of requirements which are core to the business. For example, creating a quotation or issuing a policy or renewing a policy. These are core business requirements. This is how business works. So there won't be any alteration or modification to the business requirement. So often what people get themselves confused is like business requirement is user requirement because it is coming from the business stakeholder. But it is a myth. It is not like that. Business requirement are core to business requirement, but user requirement are something that is additionally added to the system by the user. For example, a underwriter would say, I would have a functionality to review each of the policy which has been referred to me, and I should be able to handle each of these policies and make a decision on accepting it, rejecting it, or declining it for whatsoever matters. And he would say, I want this option on the fourth page at the bottom of the screen. So this is something, a user specific requirement coming from an underwriter. So this is how it differs from business requirement.
So in agile methodology contract, the scope creep is basically welcoming the change in requirements in the late phase of the project.
No. So what happens essentially is like whenever we create any high level documentation, we tend to finalize the scope, the in scope item and the out of scope item. So in scope item is something that we are going to deliver to the customer, and out of scope item are something that we are not supposed to handle, or we are not supposed to accept those. Now what happens essentially is like business users, they would try to creep the scope. They would try to bring in more out of scope item within in scope item. So you have to manage that scope creeping. So that particular term is called as scope creep, when out of scope items are brought into in scope item.
So basically, data analysis refers to the process of uh, inspecting, cleaning, and uh, by cleaning and modeling the data to find any pattern or find any pattern in the data to answer the unsolved question.
Hmm.
And uh, as a business analyst, we can use data analysis to, I think, make different reports regarding to the business level.
Okay. So essentially, it's the process of inspecting the data, analyzing the data, thereon cleaning, transforming, and modeling the data as per our needs and requirements. Okay, so that's all for you. Who wants to come next? Berlin?
Sunil, can I go?
Yeah, please. Kshitij, right?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Kshitij, I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. So the first question is same for you.
Okay. So I've been working as business analyst from past 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, for in business requirement gathering, developing web-based applications, software solutions, mobile-based applications, and I've been working in all the phases of software development lifecycle, achieving different milestones
Mm-hmm.
um, in agile, and I've been also working in the waterfall model.
Mm-hmm.
I have worked in multiple domains as a business analyst that includes insurance, e-commerce, healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, while working as business analyst, I have built close relations with professional close relations with my users, stakeholders, project manager, and the development team.
Mm-hmm.
And I have good expertise in carrying out chat sessions and focus group sessions to elicit and gather the requirements.
Okay. Can you describe me one of your the recent projects that you have worked? What was the process in that particular project? How you handled that project?
Yeah, sure. So my recent project is with Travelers Insurance. Travelers Insurance is one of the largest insurance company in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We deals in domestic property, casualty insurance, and auto insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So working at this Travelers Insurance, the scope of the project was to enhance the mobile application functionality of the current mobile application that has already been built in the past. So using this application, the customers can uh, create insurance and make payment and customize what kind of insurance they want. And at the end, they can purchase the insurance quote. So while working in this project, I started to work from the initial phase.
Mm-hmm.
So in the initial phase, I first got to understand. I first understood what is the scope and need of the project, what is the business case all about, what are the objectives that the business wants to achieve from this project. So at this initial stage, I first built the stakeholders communication plan, like what are their preferred way of communication through the RACI matrix. Then I started eliciting the requirements, um, in which I captured and draw the requirements by interviewing, brainstorming, and carrying out focus group sessions with users and stakeholders. Then I discussed those requirements with the development team, analyzed those requirements, and gathered more detail what needs to be, what I should ask as a business analyst to the users and stakeholders to break down those requirements. Then after I went back to stakeholders to gather requirements in detail, and then I documented those requirements, created prototypes and wireframes, how the mobile application page would look like after the product has been developed. Then after the requirements were confirmed, I created user stories, features, and epics to make it testable and small for the developers to develop the product. Then in the executing phase, I walked through the requirements with the development team and clarified their doubts. And I worked closely with the project manager to manage the product backlog in Jira. And then in the sprint life cycle, I conducted daily Scrum meetings to track how the project work is going on. Are there any issues developers facing? And at the end of the sprint, I carried. We had a sprint review session and a retrospective session to know to understand what has been, what can be changed in the upcoming sprint to achieve milestones in a much productive manner. And then I was also closely involved with the testing team to ensure that the requirements which has been gathered uh, is being converted into the is being tested properly in the user acceptance testing phase. And after that, after the requirements have been tested, I gained approvals from the my users and stakeholders that okay, these were the requirements, and this part of requirements have been delivered in a concise and concrete manner.
Okay, fair enough. So, since you have worked in an insurance project, may I know what is circulars in insurance?
What can you repeat?
I'm asking, what do you understand by circulars in insurance?
Circulars. Uh, I think circulars are you give detailed information on how the insurance should be developed. I'm not sure about that.
No, it's not like that. See, circular is like whenever you are defining the rates for a particular insurance. For example, you define the rate for an auto insurance. Let us consider an example of travelers insurance itself. So let's say they have been offering insurance for a state like Texas. Now, in that particular state, they have been offering insurance from last 10 years. Now, within that 10 years, whatever the rates are there, the rates keep on changing. Now, they won't be changing very frequently. For example, every month they won't be changing. They would be changing, let's say, in a frequency of 16 months or 18 months. So, these changes comes in the form of circulars. So, these circulars are issued by your state who approves your insurance policy document. So once this circular are approved and they have been finalized, they are circulated to different insurance company so that the necessary rates can be incorporated in the system itself. So whoever is the insurance provider, whether it's Allstate, Travelers, or whether it's your Pen Insurance or any XYZ insurance company, they have to comply with those circulars issued by the state department. Anyways,
Okay.
Next comes your question number 2.
Uh, Hello.
Yeah.
So the definition of done in agile, I guess, is in the Scrum team, the acceptance criteria that there will be n number of user stories and their associated acceptance criteria, which is delivered in a particular sprint. So the done means that the quality of the work and that has been completed in that particular sprint, and uh, yeah, it's actually used to assess whether the user story has been completed or not.
Okay. And who
And
is,
the
yeah,
yeah,
go on.
I was going for the part of the patient who is accountable for it. So the accountability is for business analyst. He has to ensure that the all the user stories which has been assigned in the particular sprint backlog should be completed on time. He should make sure that his development team is working on those user stories, and if they need any help, he's the accountable person as the business analyst. He can create use case diagrams or the process flow diagrams to explain how the user stories should be developed.
A few corrections over here.
Yeah.
Definition of done is essentially a checklist which is derived out of your acceptance criteria, which are written primarily by a business analyst. So acceptance
Okay.
criteria is always an accountability of a business analyst, and definition of done is always an accountability of the development team, not a BE.
Okay. Requirement traceability matrix. So, requirement traceability matrix is a kind of tool that helps to ensure that the requirements, the project scope are delivered, and uh, it actually captures the uh, client's development. I mean, the proposed whatever has been proposed by the client, and in a single document that should be delivered at the uh, you know uh, conclusion phase of the life cycle, at the end phase of the life cycle, in a properly documented manner. I
Okay.
mean, basically, it is a document that will map and trace all the requirements with different, um, you can say, test cases that can be used in UAT testing.
Okay. So essentially, you can consider it as a single repository wherein all the requirements or all the artifacts would be linked with each other. For example, all the user stories would be available in the requirement traceability matrix, linked to the appropriate test cases, the task for the development team, whatever the UML use cases or data dictionary or XYZ documents you prepare, they all would be linked in this requirement traceability matrix. So if you go by a system, so Jira or TFS has this functionality wherein you could trace the requirement and create a system specific virtual requirement traceability matrix. But if you want, you can create your own Excel sheet as well manually for creating a requirement traceability matrix as well.
So the BA communication package includes details on how the business analyst is going to communicate with the stakeholders, users, and how he's gonna, who are the development team, what are they working on, who is the project manager, how to communicate with them, and what's need to be delivered in terms of project deliverables. Hello.
Okay. So essentially, what is BA communication package is like whenever you are working as a business analyst, you create lots of documentation. Now you cannot share everything with every stakeholder. So what you do, you categorize the stakeholder basis on their interest. For example, a business case won't be of that much relevant for a development team. So what development team would be needing? They would be needing the user stories. They would be needing the UML use cases. Whereas if you consider the same case with a business stakeholder, they may not be interested in this UML use cases. They would be needing a high level documentation like BRT or a business case or a proposal plan, these kind of documents. So you have to first identify a stakeholder, whoever are present in your project, then you have to group them basis on their interest, and then you have to decide the package, like what you need to share with whom, which group of stakeholder, because you cannot share everything with everyone.
Okay.
Sorry, it should be extend.
Hello.
Yeah.
UMLs are uh, they are the general modeling language that describes how the system and the object in it behaves, and the include and exclude are the relationships
Mm-hmm.
in UML diagrams. For example, if we consider include is a relationship which is used to identify relationships between use cases, and it is used specifically to reduce the level of uh, duplication functionality by factoring out the common behavior, and extend relationship is used to show special or exceptional cases for a use case. Let's take an example of for the include relationship. Let's take example as a login function is a good example of include relationship, and for extend relationship, uh, for example, let's say uh, approval may be required for some kind of order to be confirmed, maybe 10,000 rupees, or I mean whatever number. That could be example for extend relationship.
Okay.
So change driven approach is we can say agile methodology, where the change requests are possible. As we know, Agile is very flexible in nature. The requirements are encouraged to be, it can change over time as per the needs of the stakeholders and users. And on the other hand, the plant-driven approach is a waterfall method where the requirements don't change over time. After the requirements have been gathered, they directly go into the development phase, and the product has been, and it can the change is only possible when the uh, product has been delivered completely at the end of the project.
Okay. So what are the other names for plan-driven approach and change-driven approach?
Other names as in?
How do
You
you
mean
the other names like waterfall and agile? There is one more name that is used for this.
other name?
Predictive and adaptive.
Oh yeah, predictive and adaptive. Yeah, I forgot the predictive name for the what. Uh, so transaction can be considered as a uh, single amount of work. For example, let's say if a transaction has been successful, then the whatever the data modification that has been made during that transactions uh, and has been will become a permanent part of the database.
Okay.
And so let's take another example. If there is an error occurring during a transaction and it should be cancelled, so there is requirement of rollback so that the error can be solved and all the data modifications can be erased.
Okay.
So candidate key is can be called as a unique key in database that can be any column or maybe some combination of columns that actually qualifies as a unique key.
Okay.
And candidate key can in a particular table there can be more than one candidate key. And a candidate I mean one of if there are more than one candidate key, uh, a candidate key can be qualified as primary key as well. I mean after it becomes, I mean, depending on the requirement, becomes the primary key.
But primary key applies for one specific column. Now, candidate key, since it's a combination of multiple columns, I don't think it should be eligible for a primary key.
A candidate key is, I mean, in a particular table or database, candidate key, can be is a combination of columns that actually qualifies as the unique key.
Yes, it
In
is
that
a
database.
unique key. The nature of this column is uniqueness, and we identify multiple such columns which can potentially become a primary key at a later point of time. So candidate key essentially, what I would say, defines who are the possible contender column in a particular table to become a primary key.
Okay. So data dictionary, we can consider it as a metadata repository, and which contains the detailed information, detailed contents, and information of the structure of a database and the uh, different relation. I mean, the type of relationships between its elements. You know, like detailed information on the database and the type of relationship between those elements.
Okay.
Uh, so swim lanes are a generalized concept that are used in process modeling. Uh, which adds an extra level of clarity about uh, the process flows in a flowchart diagram, and it groups the responsibilities of actors in a process, and uh, it shows how the process flows. So let's take an example of uh, example of uh, there are three people like customer, sales, and stock room. So for example, when a customer requests for some service and pays for that service, then it will go, the process flow will go like customer is requesting for service and then he pays. And on the next side there will be sales, where the sales takes the order and delivers the order. And when the stock, in the stock room, there will be, after it order has been taken, the order has been filled and been delivered from the sales department, and then at the end, coming back to the customer collects the order. So it completes the flow diagram, how the swim lane flows from one point to another.
Okay. So swim lanes are essentially lanes which are created in business process modeling. So these lanes can be categorized based on department, based on the activities, or based on the users. So the significance of swim lanes would be like, if you consider a activity or a particular person or a particular department, so whatever tasks that are happening or whatever transitions that are happening within the business process itself, that could be represented within that particular lane itself, so that it goes easier for representation and for comprehension to the business stakeholder. That okay, let's say if we consider an insurance domain, agents accountability is this many thing, underwriters accountability is this many thing, your what I would say, policy administration systems accountability is this many thing. So that gives an easy representation of what is happening and what is under whose control. So that is why we use swim lanes. Okay,
Okay.
fair enough.
Sunil, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, considering we have like 5, 6 years of experience, we won't be getting direct questions, right? Like what is RTM, what is BA communication plan or package, like that. Or like I wanted to ask you, like,
Okay. Yes, you won't be getting, it would be a mixed portfolio, to be very honest. You would be getting direct question as well as you would be getting scenario based questions as well. So towards the end, I would cover some of the scenario based questions. Let me assess everyone, at least on the basic standards. Then I would come to the scenario based question.
okay, thank you, Sunil.
Yeah. Now, who wants to go next?
I'll go next.
Can I go next, please?
Shivani.
Shivani. Yeah, Shivani. So the first question comes to you. It's the same question.
Myself Shivani. I started my professional career as a business analyst, and I have been working as a business analyst for the past 5 years. I have worked with companies like AIG, MetLife, and various firms, where my core responsibilities included delivering business requirements and analysis of those requirements and communicating them to my team.
Mhm.
So should I explain my
Yes.
The main motto of the project was we had to automate the whole payment invoice system. Whatever the invoice generation took place, we had to automate the whole payment system. In this project we implemented the OCR technology, which converted the manual invoices into electronic data, which automatically deleted the incorrect data by using the OCR technology. So my main core responsibilities in the project were mainly to evaluate the design and operating effectiveness, help in process gathering, help in business requirement gathering, and process modeling and business analysis. Um, my I was also included in the BRDs and FRDs. Then I was also included in the analysis and also wrote SQL queries in the database environment.
Mhm.
I used various tools such as SharePoint, Jira, so as to make business analysis. Uh, I was responsible for conducting chat sessions as well as stand-up meetings for daily sprint reviews. And I was responsible for creating the test case scenarios and the test and was closely related to the testing team for validating the test scenarios, and was also responsible for the UA testing as well.
Okay. So what's the challenging part you faced when you were working as an analyst in this project? What was the most challenging thing that you handled so
Uh,
far?
yeah, there were many challenges which I handled. The main challenge was to communicate with the different type of stakeholders, understanding their requirements and coping up to their requirements. Then there were some situations where the technical team was not getting the requirement in a proper way. So understanding the basic requirements of the stakeholder and communicating the technical from to the technical team was a main challenge for me.
Okay. Well,
Also, invest in agile is basically, as the name suggests, it is independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, smoke, and testable. So basically, independent is all the test scenarios and all the stuff should be independent. Negotiable, that is the negotiable. The only thing that is fixed, and we have to in an agile project. We can always, as we know, in agile development methodology is basically change in request. So coping to the changes and getting negotiable to it is the basic task. Valuable is uh, uh, it should be deliverable value is should be deliverable to the stakeholder. Estimable is whatever user stories or whatever tasks are to be done are to be estimated in a business requirement way. Small, whatever tasks are given, they should be small and concise and divided into testable. Whatever product we are creating, that should be testable, is validated to each and every test scenario.
okay. So what do invest relate to? Does it relate to requirements attributes or requirement properties?
It I guess it relates to requirement properties.
Yes, absolutely.
So basically, functional decomposition is the basically we take complex problems and dividing those complex issue into smaller parts is basically functional decomposition. So
Yeah, please go on.
should I explain it with an example?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, if suppose the ATM login system. So if we have to log into an ATM, so that this basic issue is divided into smaller chunks. So go to the ATM, insert the pin, insert the ATM card, enter the pin. So all these scenarios are divided into different chunks. That is basically function.
Yes.
Impact analysis is basically impact analysis ensures that whether the capture requirement which we have captured does not affect any this does not affect or does not take the project into any risk or any other related risk assessment. So basically, my task was to whether in the impact analysis, I ensured that whatever requirements we have captured, that doesn't affect the project in a future reference. I made sure that whatever use cases or whatever human diagrams I made or whatever user stories I took into consideration that that doesn't lead my project to any risk assessment.
Okay. Can you explain me 5 why technique in impact analysis?
I didn't get the question.
Can you explain me 5 why technique in impact analysis?
Oh, I don't know the answer, sorry.
Okay, so when we conduct impact analysis, so there is a series of questions that we go through. Like for example, there is a error in particular page. Now, why that error occurred in that particular page? What's the root cause of it? We do a kind of root cause analysis before concluding around what is the impact of that particular system. So we tend to ask as many questions as possible, and these questions are in the form of why. So every why would uncover the hidden aspect of what is the next area of root cause analysis. Then the next why, then the next why. So this is not essentially 5 why, it can extend up to 7 or 9 why until and unless you find the root cause from where this particular error occurred in the system. It could be a QA miss, it could be a developer miss, it could be a BA miss in terms of capturing that particular requirement, or it could be a miss from the business user side that they haven't given that particular requirement. So this way you tend to identify by asking whys or questions to different stakeholders and create your impact analysis report.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. Whatever, how big is a project, and according to the project, what type of manual workforce we would require to complete the project is basically the production capacity needed by an organization to meet the demand is basically capacity planning in a methodology.
Production capacity needed by the organization or the project?
Or by the project.
Yeah. So it essentially capturing the number of hours of bandwidth of the Scrum team within a particular project.
Okay, basically, focus group session is what if there is a complex issue which is occurred in the sprint or in the project. So sticking to that point and then doing discussing that problem or discussing that issue with the particular team which is related to it. It is basically focus group session. And we in focus group sessions we basically improve the existing ideas. And in brainstorming session, the main difference is we basically ask more questions and generate new ideas from it. So that is the main difference between brainstorming session and focus group session.
And what about the users who are invited to attend this session? Are there any differentiation between them?
In the focus group session, whatever the issue is, so related to that problem, the focus group session is has people regarding to it. In brainstorming session, basically, whoever is the uh, stakeholder, suppose we have to do requirement analysis or requirement gathering. So related to that domain, we do brainstorming sessions to that particular people.
Yes, absolutely.
Process modeling is basically business process modeling in it is the activity basically or the stages in which all the processes are done, and uh, it is a particular, I can say it is a process by which we can describe our project, how we are modeling it.
Okay. And what do you understand by process re-engineering?
Process engineering, suppose in a scenario where uh, there is a complex task and we there's a change in requirement, and we have to cope up the whole system with the change in requirement. So we need to do the analysis and redesigning of the system. So that is basically process re-engineering.
And how often
Um,
does it happen in a particular project context?
in an agile methodology, uh, it may happen 2 to 3 times based on the client what they exactly want.
No. See,
It
what
depends on project to
happens?
project, I guess.
No. So what happens essentially is business process modeling is a special branch in business analysis wherein you deal with the different workflows associated to a particular system. Now, once your workflow is designed, it cannot be changed very frequently because ultimately it would shake the entire system. So, business process re-engineering is like you have to identify the flaw in the existing system once, let's say, in every 2 years, and you go about fixing those processes flaws in that particular system. So it doesn't happen very often. Business process re-engineering happens once in every 2 year or 3 year for a given project.
Yeah. Yeah, technique is basically a prioritization technique which we use for product backlog. So basically, Moscow is must-have requirement, should have all the requirements, could have and would be. So basically, in the sprint, as it is an agile methodology, each and every task is divided into sprint. So we use Moscow technique to prioritize the sprint backlogs. So suppose there is a user story in which there are features. So which is the feature which is on top priority, which is to be done at at, at immediate response. So we put that user story in the must-have category. Whatever is required for the project, but it is having less priority and it should be it is critical for the system to be included. So that goes in the should be category. Could be category is are the additional features which are required, uh, and basically they are the user requirements which we get. So that can be done at a later phase in the project, which are not so important. Goes into the could be category, and the won't category is basically the requirements which are not to be taken into the project. So by using this all concepts, we categorize the sprint backlog and prioritize them and do the sprint review accordingly.
Okay.
Sprint 0 is the basic initial sprint.
And what all activities are performed in the sprint 0?
In sprint 0, basically whatever the basic requirements which we have taken, which are supposed to be completed at the initial phase, are initiated in sprint 0.
For example,
For example, if it is a login system, what are the login credentials, the username, and the password? These are the in a login system. These are the basic functionalities which are to be done. So these responsibilities are divided in sprint 0. The minimal requirements which are supposed to be completed to start a particular sprint, that minimal requirement comes from sprint 0.
okay. So do you think development team would be able to start development in sprint 0?
It depends upon the functionality. Now, if for a logging system, if it is a logging system, yes, by considering the sprint 0 documentation, they can start the development. Suppose there is a sprint where you need use cases, use case diagram, then the UML modeling documentation to refer to, and uh, then start the development. Then in that scenario, sprint 0 is not the only document where we can refer to. So it depends upon the functionality what we are doing.
Okay. Don't you think before starting with development, the infrastructure needs to be set up for the development team and it should take minimum
Yeah,
1 to 2 weeks?
yeah, it should.
So that is
Yes.
something would go in sprint 0. The rest all would
Okay,
start from sprint 1.
okay.
Okay. Next would be
Five types of requirement categories. Yeah, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, then the business requirements, UI requirements,
mhm,
testing requirements, market requirements.
okay. Explain them what it
Oh,
is.
okay. Business requirements are the requirements which are basically the main goal of the business, what the product wants from the project. So they are basically what are the business requirements to which what we have to acquire from the business. Then market requirements are what all are the market needs, what the people require from the project, or what the client require, and what is the scenario in the market. That are the market requirements. Functional requirements are basically all the technical requirements, the functional dependencies, whatever the project needs. UI requirements is how the system should look like from the user's perspective. Uh, is basically the user requirement, the UI requirement.
Oh, great. Thanks, Shivani. Now, who wants to come next?
Can I go next?
Yeah, please. So the first question remains same to you. Mhm.
Like I'm working on a project. I'm working on a project which is about in which it allows of front and back, so that they can deposit via the mobile application.
Mhm.
The project like is like in the planning phase. So my responsibilities was to identify the target customers and to understand the requirements and to understand the problems and depend upon the different phases of the SDLC. The requirements was changing like continuously as different parts of the software development.
Okay. Great.
The Scrum ceremony relates from sprint planning of the sprint review meeting, the daily progress call, the retrospectives, the sprint retrospective, then after that the sprint backlog, the sprint, the product backlog.
No, only first four are correct. Sprint backlog and product backlog are not ceremony. Okay, so what is their sequence? What come first? What come next?
I guess the sprint review, the sprint planning
Mhm.
comes on. After that, the sprint review,
Mhm.
or I guess the daily planning call.
Mhm.
After that, the sprint review. After that,
Okay, so what happens in sprint review?
sprint review meeting, we review and we go through all the requirements of that particular what are the features to be covered in that particular
Covered or what has been developed? It's a demo.
what has been, yeah, it's a demo and what has been developed.
Yes. Yes.
It's like it does for the need and it explains the strength, the threat, and the opportunities for that particular.
Okay. And how you have used it in your project? Any real-time example?
Yes, I do have the because while I guess I have done this in the while doing this while defining the scope of the project. So it's I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Right.
To discover more about the delivery to deliver like at the time of delivering the things and at the time of delivering the features which has been developed yet.
Okay.
The decision analysis is the quantitative uh, like the system wide approach to evaluate evaluate the important features which has been given by the client and which has been communicated by the organization.
Okay.
The DDL command is the data the DDL is the data. The DDL some of the DDL commands like create, alter, drop, truncate, and the basic DDL commands are select, insert, update, delete.
Okay. What's the difference between drop command and delete command?
Drop command deletes the object from the database, and the delete command just deletes records from that particular table. Data visualization is to showcase the data in a representative form, and the tool is like Tableau and Excel.
Okay. And what are the typical scenarios wherein you would be using data visualization?
To do different types of analysis like cost benefit analysis, and to represent it to stakeholders, or to represent it to any of the
Okay. So those are essentially requirement properties.
In requirement,
Yes.
uh, it is it is referred to it is referred for the requirements and the requirements which are specific and acceptable in the real time.
Okay. Can you expand SMART? What is S? What is M? What is A? What is R? What is P?
The S stands for specific,
Mhm.
A is for assignable, R is for time related or time bound.
Okay. Mhm. Okay.
The also can be and has some so we look for an alternate like like an alternate solution to complete that particular issue that should be alternate. The exception is like if any unintended unintended path to the which result because of the missing information or the system availability. If any like runtime or any real-time exception that can be referred as exception. The features should be like whatever the feature should be in our project in our particular product. Like it would be like let's say in a mobile application. So the feature would be like it should work for an iOS as well as an Android application both, and the capability is the task for that particular application. That what is the application is capable of.
So what is whose subset? Is feature subset of capabilities or capabilities is a subset of feature?
I guess the features are the subset of the capability. Yes, capability is like the particular the main task of the application. So features would be the subset of it.
Okay. Okay. So Herlin, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So,
Okay. So the first question remains the same for you.
I have around 8 years of experience in all the phases of development cycle with the development, analysis, design, and testing and deployment. Um, my current project is with the market to pharmaceuticals, which is about the Ready Smart, which is like an injection which is invented to foreign sector data to the secure server. That is basically about the collecting data about patients and injecting to the My role in the project was about business analysis and by working with end users and other stakeholders to identify the requirements and the proposed enhancements. I conducted my team, we conducted that business managing the based on team and we owned all the projects and the responsibility of the business analyst with the UI screens or layouts you can say with that and perform data mapping and SQL queries to filter the data out for the report generations. And we also maintain RTM, that is requirement traceability matrix and test matrix with the test results for all the use cases. And we attended daily, weekly status meetings, and I used Jira as for the defect and issue tracking, and obviously use the Excel for my other documents and the Word for maintaining the other documents.
Okay, fair enough.
Velocity is like a time of amount of work which we have, like how many functionality we have to develop, and we calculate it according to the time and hours, like how many people are there to work and how many hours we have. So according to that, we calculate.
Okay.
Retiring a requirement is like basically it's about the deleting the requirement from the log as we don't need it, or like its functionality is changed and we don't need it no longer. So that's how we retire a requirement.
Okay. Any specific example?
For example, like in a payment module, we are not accepting a particular type of credit card. Like we are not accepting American Express, for example, no longer in the project. Then that we will delete from the requirement log that accepting American Express card.
Okay.
Transitional requirement is basically like from one state to another, to transition the project from one state to another. Like for the, we can say we want to test it on the different web browsers like IE or Firefox. We want to in some cases, like some requirements don't work perfectly on the IE or some don't work on the IE, also on the Firefox. So in that case, we can change the requirements according to the platform. Or
Okay. So are these requirements permanent in nature?
no, I guess no.
Yes. It is temporary in nature. They
Yeah.
are there in project for a period of time. After that, they are no longer needed. Later on, they are retired.
I think no, but we can surely can move those undelivered tasks to the another sprint.
But if your business stakeholder argues that he needs whatever is decided in the sprint, so what you would do?
Then yeah, if the project, if the situation comes that like kind, for example, like project is like not completing on the time, or we have like a big backlog, then if stakeholder argues and get approved for the another time, then we can get.
Okay, don't you think we have the option to change the capacity of the sprint? We can include resources.
We can always use that.
Yes. So that is the approach. You have to change the capacity of the sprint.
Basically, it's back tracing and forward. Tracing is basically to link between the requirements and the elements, right? So in backward and forward tracing means like to link the requirements with the which we have already developed or we have to develop in the forward tracing. Does that mean?
Yes. So essentially what happens is like whenever we are asked to trace back a requirement to its source, like how the requirement originated. So the approach is always back tracing the requirement. We go back to the requirement repository and check what is the base version of that requirement, and after the baselining of the requirement, how many subsequent versions has been created for that requirement. So that process is back tracing. Now forward tracing is like your system is having a current functionality and the user is asking a particular change. So you do a impact analysis around what all requirements it would be impacting if this change is accepted in the system. So you are essentially forward tracing the requirement through impact analysis.
Okay. Okay, so it was about the injecting the data. So functional requirement was basically about the designing the classes to insert the data from one place to another. So you want me to explain how, like the approach or
Approach and what were the contents within it.
okay. Approach was agile, obviously, and the content was about the how many classes were there. We have to include and their relationship with each other and the objects of every class and their accessibility in the class and to the other classes. So kind of that and like patient's data was there. One was there like patient data about the basic information about the patient and then what the disease he has and what are the medicine he was given and the what are the side effects if he got any. So all these four different things were made out of different classes and objects, and those objects were referred to the physical like healthcare professional, like who was attending that patient and what he prescribed and which pharmacy it went. So it was all related and about the relationship between all these objects and the features. Change management is the managing the change of the requirement. Like it goes through the access for the change and then prepare and plan and then implement phase of that change.
Okay. So after you have done the impact analysis, after assessing the requirement, shouldn't it be approved or denied? Shouldn't it go through approval process before implementing it?
Before that clear access for the change or the prepare for the change. In
Yes.
that case only we get the approval from the stakeholder whatever, and then we plan it.
Okay. Great.
Progressive elaboration is technique for managing a project that is for particularly as the project continuously modified or detailed or implemented as it goes, as well as the details come, then the set of information becomes that progressive elaboration. We can it goes through the as the project goes through, then as the project progresses, as the technique is called.
Okay. So essentially, uh, how often does it happen in your particular project?
Like once it starts, right, and then if any change comes in between, then also it's
Okay. So essentially, in agile projects, there is always a scope of progressive elaboration since the requirements are not that much clear upfront.
yeah. Risk register is just to like a repository of all the risks identified in the project, like nature of the risk or the who we have to reference and who's like who will take the responsibility of that risk. Or sometimes, for example, like if we if we are implementing only a payment system and we didn't include all the cards mm, which are allowed in the system, and then the user then it will be a reduced functionality for the user that he can't use um, all the cards kind of that. So it's like the responsibility will be on the product. So we
Okay.
are in risk register, we just log all the risk transactions.
Okay. Fair enough. Who is pending? Okay. Thanks, Helen. Shashanka, can we start with you?
Yes, Sunil. Sure.
Okay. The first question remains the same.
So I have been working as a business analyst for the past 5 years now, and I have been involved with end-to-end development of a product, and I'm well versed with all the phases of the software development life cycle. I've worked with methodologies like Agile and Waterfall, and also hybrid methodology, and I have experience producing all the necessary project deliverables. And to tell something about my project, I was working with Hartford Insurance recently. My main task in that project was to improve the customer service and quality, and to act as a communication bridge between my business and technical team. I was there from the planning phase itself for this project. Uh, so I'm uh, I was responsible for requirement elicitation, gathering, conducting chat sessions, interacting with my stakeholders to gather requirements and then document them to get a sign off later on. It was an agile project, so we worked in sprints. So I was a part of all the sprint ceremonies. I helped the product owners to facilitate the product backlog and to review the test cases for the
Okay.
testing team.
Okay, fair enough. What's the business problem you solved via this project from a functional
Uh,
perspective?
Actually, this project was focused on workers' compensation. Like we wanted to improve the claim processing system of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So it like the entire process when we get a claim, then analyzing and investigating it for the workers' compensation claim.
Okay.
So reverse engineering is like when we get a product in the market. So if for example my company is interested in that product, so we will maybe buy that product and start analyzing that product from the end towards the start. So it is like I have a developed application, and I start looking at all the features and what all that software needed in order to be implemented. Refactoring is a bit different because it is like restructuring an existing application. Like we can change or modify some some requirement, some part of the code that way.
Okay. So it is at the code level, refactoring. So it's like
Okay.
improving the coding standards of a particular system based on the current benchmarked requirement.
Oh, okay. Okay. Um, so as a BA, I think my role would be like I would work from the end-to-end development of the entire project, whereas the quality assurance team, they would be part of some of the aspects in the development of a project, like while when it comes to the test scenarios and like testing that like writing test cases and all. So when even as a BA, I also can help the QA team to write test cases and test the acceptance criteria. So these are the similar aspects.
Okay. And what about the accountability part?
Um, so the like the for the testing part, the QA will be accountable, whereas for the like BAs will be like as a BA, I would be responsible for the requirement gathering part, like the writing the acceptance criteria. That would be my accountability, whereas making sure that the project works according to that criteria is the responsibility.
Okay.
So personas are, I think we can say that they are substitutes for the real users. So whenever we have a system and we want to know, like what would a user think of the system, so we can use personas. That can be any person. It can even be a stakeholder. So he can act as a user and tell us what improvements or what problems he faced, or if he likes the system or not. So it can also be like we can also use the data that we collected from users when we did the requirement elicitation with
Okay.
um so I think the main difference is that uh, as a BA we don't handle physical data modeling
Mhm.
because I think we are responsible for conceptual and logical modeling. uh, the conceptual modeling is like it represents the highest level of relationship between the entities. It includes the entities and their relationships, and we don't mention anything about the primary keys and all. Whereas in the physical model is like it represents how the model is built within the database, and it shows tables and everything. So it is a very deep detailed representation of the database.
Okay.
Um, so I think that version control is the control of deliverables, whereas the configuration management is the entire process that leads to the project deliverable. Like version, we have several versions of a particular software, whereas configuration management, it involves several aspects such as change management, project management, etc., which cannot be managed by a version.
Okay. So version control is more at a software level, and configuration management is more at a document level. So we have a document versioning as well in place whenever we are creating a PRT or FRT. So we have a specific section over there, document history. So that comprises of your configuration management. When it comes to version management or version control, whenever you are uploading the next version of that particular piece of document, the SharePoint software itself creates a version for it, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. So it is more at a system level.
Okay. I think three T's are the main main tools that we use as a business analyst, because to implement our task we need tools such as Jira, SharePoint, etc. Even UML UML technologies, so that we can explain explain the requirements that we gathered. We can document them and share them, and the tasks are like the tasks that we have to perform, like eliciting, conducting interviews, focus group, brainstorming, and technique. I think I can say that we can use uh, like the Moscow prioritization technique, the SWOT analysis. These are the technique. It's like the process that we have to follow.
Okay.
So this the state chart diagrams, it represents the various states in a particular process. So it is like the system is in maybe for example for ATM system it is idle at the start. So once a user enters and enters its PIN, so it is in active state, and so like the process starts. He'll enter his PIN. He'll then the user will then the machine will validate it. So it will represent every state that the machine goes through. Mm, so if I'll split the user stories, like so if there is any like the user stories are supposed to be concise and as small as possible. So while splitting the user stories, I'll make sure that uh, like I don't miss out any of the content, any of the user stories, and any of the requirements are not missed out when while splitting. And
Okay. So what are the criterias basis on which you split the user stories? I explained you 10 criterias, 8 to 10 criterias.
like the effort required in the effort required to implement that user story, the variations in the data, the workflows and all.
Yes, workflows, operations, users. So depending on these criterias, you can split your user stories. RCA is root cause analysis.
So root cause analysis is like what factor caused a problem in the system, like what caused that particular issue. So it is like it describes a wide variety of approaches that can be used to uncover that particular cause. Like we will investigate what caused that particular error. If it was a bug in the system, then we'll start with like maintaining the system and issue bug related problems, or like what was the actual source that caused the problem. So like we can ask several questions like yeah, the 5 why techniques and all to identify the root cause and the root cause of the problem.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Shashanka. Is everyone done?
No, Manjot is left.
Okay, Manjot is left. Okay, so Manjot, the first question remains the same.
I started my professional career as a business and have been working for the past 6 years. I've been working in multiple environments like design, waterfall, camera. I was responsible for basically taking up the user story, tracking developers and projects progress using Jira, Gantt charts, and also monitoring the customers. Also take where my help and support the responsible for the walk. I have been working with product owners for my past project. For my projects, I would start off and start the so it's with Reengineering. That's the company in start. I've been working with the product owner. It's a third party logistics warehouse supply company. It's focused on logistics and also to retailers and grocery as well as e-commerce. We've been working on a developing a user-friendly mobile application which will let managers keep track of their warehouse inventory and also help to detect the future demand.
Okay, now let us go scenario-based mode. Let us cover some scenario-based questions for this.
If there's a change, so first of all, I'll look if there's any scope, like what is the scope or is it really necessary, the change that has been requested? And can I accommodate that change in the ongoing sprint or do I have to take up in the next sprint? Seeing the importance of that feature or the changes, then I'll see what documents I have worked on and also on and have to change the work. first, the main thing would be I'll just scope. Is it really necessary to
No,
add that requirement?
the question is not that. Read the question carefully. Here the requirement is not changing. Here the way the requirements were written earlier, that is changing. The representation of the requirement, not the requirement.
So I would say if I'll try to make some human diagrams just to make requirements.
Okay.
Prototyping, yeah, prototyping is human diagram. If there is a need requirement, because in the development team has that problem. During my time in Germany,
Okay. So don't you think that would add additional cost to the project because you have already exhausted 2 months of your bandwidth in writing these requirements. Now again, uh, you are considering writing the requirements, but you also have the requirement gathering work for the next phase of the project. So would you be able to accommodate this change in representation of the requirement?
first thing what I do is I try to set try to explain them one on one. But again, if they still don't get requirement the way we have we try
Okay, so let me ask this question to everyone and have their viewpoint. What would be their thought process around it?
Basically, I guess we can make the user stories more simple, or we can like split them according to the need, like according to the role or whatever it is. And
Mm-hmm.
the second thing we can change is obviously the more detailed UMLs
Mm-hmm.
or the yeah, according to the like whatever class or object is there, we can make more class diagrams, more detailed class diagrams, or the connectivity between all the classes and all.
Okay. Any other opinion, suggestions, anyone? Okay. So see, if you read the question is very subjective in nature, and the circumstances and situation would be different for everyone in their particular project. So essentially, when we observe such situation wherein you spend 2 months of time gathering the requirement, and after obtaining the official approval from the business stakeholder, you pass it on to the development team. Now, for some reason, the development team is unable to comprehend the set of requirements that you have produced to them. So essentially, what you would do as a business analyst is there is a lesson to learn over here. So you have to essentially change the business analysis approach over here. If you go by the definition of Babok, you have to change the business analysis approach. Now, what all comes under business analysis approach is like how you represent the requirement. Probably like Manjot already said, you would include more UML, more use cases. Probably like Herlin said that you would be writing more clear user stories, more splitted user stories, which are more concise in nature, more comprehensive in nature. And to support them, you would create the necessary supporting artifacts, which are of the use for the technical team's consideration. So essentially, what the answer that I was looking for here is, if you go by the business analysis term, you have to change the business analysis approach over here after you have learned the lesson. because see, in real world project, whenever you have already exhausted 2 months of time writing those requirements, if someone asks to you to revisit those requirements and do the necessary changes, you already have a handful of activities in your hands, so you may not have that much time to spend on revisiting those requirements. So probably what you would do, you would explain those requirements to the development team in a deeper context, and from there onward you would learn a lesson and go about writing the requirement basis on the need of the audiences.
Well, John, project, I would say I'll first go through the article, any document that have been templates, and then I would try to identify my stakeholder.
Okay. So how do you identify your team? Let's consider a scenario, your team is geographically distributed. How would you identify your team?
I will be asking as a business analyst, I'll be asking my project that
Okay. So while analyzing the document, shouldn't you be referring the stakeholders list and org chart for that matter? So that would be having all the information about the stakeholders who are there in the project. I would try to reach out. Okay. Also, if in case there are additional consultations needed, you could if say there are some meetings planned and you feel that your knowledge is not sufficient, you always have the option of inviting a expert judge in your session who would essentially be a subject matter expert.
First thing I would do is I'll take uh, but take my or our customer asking if it's missing, they are complete. I'll back up with my back up with all
So let's say it's a miss from your side as a business analyst, what you would do? For some reason you missed out capturing those requirements, what you would do?
I change my one
Okay, so see, if in a particular project this circumstances happen, the business would always ask for a justification. So how would you justify your missing requirements? What would you consider in that justification? Because that's a miss from your side. You
maybe some external factors. For example, I covered the environment
Mhm.
that external factors will come next time you have to change the way we have it project. We have to make it project interviewing rather than just yeah.
Okay. So let's say your business disapproves your justification. In that case,
I would
don't you think you should be creating a risk mitigation plan for it? So see, whenever the things are happening, maybe it's a miss from any stakeholder, whether it's a development team, whether it's a QA team, whether it's a BA team. There is always a document to rescue us. That is risk mitigation plan. So if in case the business disapproves your justification, you can go on convincing them with the help of your risk mitigation plan. You have to convince them in such a way that if next time such situation happen, then this is our risk mitigation plan, because risks are bound to happen in any project. There won't be any project in this entire universe wherein risk doesn't happen. It happens, but it has to be supported by a risk mitigation plan.
So my plan would be, rather than supporting them on daily basis, I conduct a chat session, ask them what are the creative things solve, so that they don't have to come back.
Okay, so even after conducting JAD session, they continue to do the same thing. It's still happening, this issue.
I'll be conducting workshops or meetings with them repeatedly, like very
Okay, but do you think in a regular scenario wherein the BA ratio is like 1 BA is to 15 developers, you would be having that much bandwidth to conduct frequent workshops? So the ideal approach in this case would be back your requirements with necessary scenarios, write as much scenarios as possible. So let's say you are designing a functionality, write as much scenarios as possible so that the development team and the quality assurance team are well understood in advance about the consequences of this functionality. If this functionality is implemented in a particular system, what are the typical scenarios that would happen? So that would help them to code the system or test the system in and around those scenarios. So scenarios are an ideal approach to deal with this particular circumstance.
because we need scenarios that FAQ, like prepare a document that has FAQ, so you don't have to come.
FAQ is one of the option, but people do not have that much time to prepare an FAQ. That is ideally completed during the transition phase when you create the user manuals. But scenarios are something regular business discoveries that you include in and around a particular requirement. For example, if I consider a particular requirement like I shouldn't no the requirement is like if a valid license is entered, then the policy holder should be able to issue a policy. Now, in that valid license, you have to mention the scenarios like the license would be of this many digits for this state. The license would start from this particular thing, which would help the development team to understand what's the pattern for that particular license for that particular state. Now, if the validation fails, what should happen in that particular system? If the validation succeeds, what should happen? If there is a license which is outside of United States, there would be a referral triggered to the underwriting team. Now, once the referral goes to the underwriting team, he has the option to approve the policy, partially approve the policy, or deny the policy. Now, the underwriter also has the option to make necessary adjustment to the license and issue the policy with an increased premium rate, considering the fact that the license is coming somewhere from outside of United States. So this way you can highlight as many scenarios as possible in and around your particular requirement, considering the business context.
It is a completely I like that language the requirement there are I explain that this one is back data showing that future aspect what would be the pros and cons of just but
Okay, so let's say there are 5 stakeholders. 2 of them vote for positively for your requirement. 3 of them are still not confident about your requirement. What you would do in that case?
so I'll just try to know like the people who have not said yes to my requirement or not said positively ask if there's any cost or is there anything they are talking about or is there the time being that cost what are the exact costs why they are
Okay, so you should go about perfectly said. So you should go about the understanding of their reasoning. So why they are not in favor of your requirement. So once you understand the reason behind why they are not in favor of your particular requirement, you could identify the commonalities around those reasoning and establish a common understanding with all the 5 stakeholders. So you need to first understand why they are not in favor of that particular requirement. If it is something that could be easily mitigated, then you could understand establish a common understanding with them right in that meeting itself.
have to create some of the artifacts that's not that I would not say no directly, but I make it as a least prioritized task out of all. Once I'm done my priority, my task, become
But why would you take up? That is not your work. Saying no to anyone is a different question. But at the first place, why would you take someone else's responsibility? Being a BA. No, you cannot say it that bluntly as well. But you have to maintain that thin line because see, these are real-time scenarios. I have seen many project managers delegating their responsibilities to the business analyst. But there is a way to say no. You can say no in a different way. You could like say that I am already occupied with so many things, so I cannot handle this particular responsibility. And you can use your negotiation skills, or rather I would say the soft skills that I have explained you in one of the section, and try to convince them, because they cannot
yes,
force you something on which is not your responsibility, but you have the option not to accept it. If you go on accepting these things, then there would be a day when your days would start at 9 a.m. and it would end at 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. midnight. Okay.
again I would ask them to refer those business artifacts which have been prepared for one of the projects.
Mhm.
When as and when I get time, I will be reviewing them, give, giving them updates like what you guys do, what projects are, how to go about it. The first thing I'll ask them to read all the templates, all the project information they need to know before starting.
Okay, and how you would assess them after, let's say, 1 week of time, or what should be the approach for assessing their knowledge?
Again, I'll conduct a meeting or a session that last first just to know what what position are they right now, how much.
Okay. Right from the start where I had to make sure the task, every task, are done very accurately
There should not be any problem from right from the start when we have the other requirements getting fine. And then I have to, being the voice of customer, I have to be with stakeholders in my team. So I have to make sure I should communicate all those requirements properly. I should document all those requirements clearly and make small short user stories. Getting that getting that sprint planning meeting, sprint review, sprint retrospective, and daily scrum, conducting those meetings efficiently. And finally, after those, in the delivery phase of the project, I make sure the walkthrough should be conducted, a walkthrough of any application should be conducted by me, and my stakeholders are satisfied for what I'll explain.
But these all things are at a project level. Here the question is, how can you contribute to the overall organization's branding? How these all things would contribute to the organization branding? Okay. So have you heard of something called as white papers or research papers, which every organization creates in and around an upcoming technology or new technology or in a particular domain? So those all documents are created by your business analyst in that particular organization. So they essentially showcase the organization capability to the outside world while making them stay competitive to their peers. So you would be essentially creating white papers, research papers, you would be creating some blogs for your organization. So you need to be very good in terms of writing things on the emerging technology. So let's say you are working in a banking domain. So what's the next wave of technology in banking domain? What's the booming thing that is coming in banking technology? Sorry, banking domain or BFSI domain. So you would be writing various details in and around it. Also, you would be creating, you would be collaborating and contributing to the domain competency group of your organization. So that is also one of the responsibilities when you are working as a business analyst associated with any XYZ organization. Okay, so these were the questions that I had for you today.